Philippians chapter 4, it's verse 10. Hear the word of the Lord. Paul writes, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. This morning, we are starting a 3-part series on the single word of contentment. And you probably are thinking, how can you spend 3 sermons on this? Well, there's a lot to contentment, as you can imagine. And it's such an important topic, especially at this time of year when we're giving thanks to God and remembering all his many blessings before our lives. And then we're also coming into the Christmas season, which can become a very materialistic holiday if you lose sight of Christ. And so we're going to be talking about contentment, and just as I'm letting you know where we're going, this week we'll talk about contentment. Next week we'll talk about contentment in the morning. And then the following we'll talk about Daniel in the morning. And we're having a Thanksgiving service at First Baptist Church. They've invited me to preach. And so we're going to finish up our series on contentment at First Baptist Church on Sunday night, that third Sunday night. So stay tuned. Please be prepared and ready to come celebrate Thanksgiving service with a community of believers. It's been a great honor to be asked to do that, so look forward to seeing you all there that night. But yeah, okay, so we have a lot of ground to cover on the topic of contentment. And the first thing I want to share with you is the trouble with Christians in general, or people in general, is they like to treat the symptoms but not the root causes of an illness in terms of Christianity. You know what I mean? Okay, so if you have a fever, you have the chills, or just a regular malaise, pain while swallowing and a sore throat, coupled with nausea and vomiting, what do you have? You actually have strep throat. Okay, so if you have a fever, chills, dehydration, aching muscles, loss of appetite, congestion, headache, and or vomiting, what do you have? Flu. Okay. If you have nausea with or without vomiting, fatigue, general irritableness, loss of appetite, you have pregnancy. Man, you guys are pretty good, I will say. That was a trick one. You have pregnancy, which might be a very bad illness indeed. Just kidding. Okay. So, but we often take medicine to treat our symptoms, right? When you have a headache, you take Tylenol, or maybe you take ibuprofen. When you have a stomach ache, you end up taking Pepto-Bismol or Tums, or maybe you drink a Sprite like I do. Or when you have, stuffy nose, you end up taking a decongestant. But none of that stuff actually treats the root of your illness, right? They just takes away the pain that comes along with the illness. And so the same is true for the Christian life, in that you cannot treat the troubles that you're facing in your Christian life by taking care of the symptoms. You have to dive into the root cause. And only after that root cause is taken care of, then can you be made whole. So this morning, if you struggle with the external symptoms of anger, moderate depression, lack of joy, being full of self, or inability to love, if you struggle with shortness of temper with your wife or your kids or your coworkers or just the general public or the average person driving down the street or your fast food server or whatever, you may have the disease called discontentment. All of those things are just symptoms to a deeper root cause of something that's going on within you, which is not being content. Discontentment, if untreated, is kind of like a virus that can be passed along to other people. It can spread misery around. So if you are discontent, you will probably make everyone around you miserable, joyless and unloving people, because you are not content. You know how this happens, right? Your father or mother comes home discontent with their life at work or something that's going on in their interpersonal relationships, and they're just grumpy with their kids. Their kids want to play, and they're gruff with them. And so in the kids' joy becomes more miserable because they are being treated because of that discontentment that other person has. The life circumstances that you feel discontent with will affect every area of your life, and you will cause other people to be miserable as you feel miserable. So, and this is why Paul wrote in the Philippians, learn to be content in all things. If you have that passage open, look at it for a second. He tells the Philippians that he's not rejoicing because he's not saying these things because he has something he needs in verse 11, but that he's learned to be content in all circumstances. And that's what we need to do, is to learn to be content in all circumstances. And that Paul wouldn't say that he had learned it if it weren't possible to do, okay? So we're not asking for something that's impossible to do. It's something that's possible to do and that you can learn to do. All of us play different games or sports or different things. At the beginning, when we're learning how to do something, we are pretty bad at it. But with practice and effort, we can become better at it. And the same thing is that way with contentment. And who wants to be content? Cassidy raises her hand, Corianne. Okay. Listen, this is a good thing, trust me. You want to be content because don't you want to be joyful no matter what life circumstances deal you? That you take the power out of life such that no matter what happens to you, have a peace in a sense that God is in control and that nothing that comes against you can change that. Who doesn't want that from themselves? Who doesn't want take the power away from other people to try and make you miserable or upset? I like that. When somebody comes at me about something, then I can be content that I know what the truth is, and it's not going to take away my joy because I'm content with who God is and how He's created me to be. Who doesn't want that from themselves, for themselves? So some of us let something get in the way of that, right, in our lives. It can be our own desires, but it also can be externals, which we can allow to take away our joy. Think about, some of us have struggled with this to lesser or greater degrees, depending on how the Cowboys or the Chargers are playing that season, right? I remember just when the Chargers went to the Super Bowl, they lost. The next year, I spent all my time watching every game, and just like, after they would lose, I would just lose my joy for the day. It would dig me into the deep, dark hole, and I would never want to come out of that hole. For that whole day, I allowed my discontentment with my team's performance, which was completely out of my control, take away my joy. How stupid is that? And the same thing is for us in many different circumstances of our lives are out of our control, and yet we let those circumstances take away our joy and rob us because we're discontent with what God has for us in these circumstances. Sometimes we just have to face it that God does not want the Cowboys to win the Super Bowl. We have to be content with that, okay? I don't hear many amens. Only one San Francisco fan who's learned that suffering lesson. But did you know this morning that even discontentment has a root cause? Okay? The root of anger and depression and selfishness and all of that misery is discontentment. But discontentment also has a root cause. It's a symptom of something. And that symptom is that we are struggling to rest in God's sovereignty. That we struggle to just simply trust God. And so we become discontent with what He has for us at a given time. So I will say it again. A struggle with contentment is a struggle with the sovereignty of God. in what God has for you. So not only is discontentment self-punishing because you yourself go around being miserable, it's also actually a grievous sin against God by not trusting in what he has for you. It's the moment by moment refusing to accept what God has for you and trusting in his goodness. And that is sin. The secret to being content actually becomes quite obvious for us once you point out the root cause. If the root cause of discontentment is lack of trust in the sovereign Lord, then the solution seems pretty simple, right? Just to simply begin to trust in what God has for you, embracing what God has for you in any given season of your life. And so I'm going to ask you all to do something for me this week. Every one of you, young and old, to memorize Romans 8:28. It can be a great comfort and a source to you that when you feel discontentment, you can remember that it is a distrust of the sovereignty of God and that you can lean into the goodness of God in that time. Romans 8:28. And we know that God works all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. God is working all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So if you lean into that, you are leaning into the sovereignty of God, and no matter what circumstances you find yourself, you can say with joy that no matter where I am, God, I trust you that you are going to use this in my life and work it for good. We may not always like that circumstance, but how many of us can look back on our lives and say, yes, I remember that difficult time, and when I was in that difficult time, I was really struggling, but I am thankful for that difficult time because I would not be where I am. I would not be who I am today if having not gone through that. That is the kind of thing that we need to look into when it comes to discontentment, is saying, God, you've been faithful in the past. Shouldn't I trust that now and say that you will continue to be faithful? That I have seen how you have turned bad and used it for good in my life. Now I can trust you in this circumstance that is discontenting me, and I can have joy because I know that none of my pain will ever be wasted. None of the suffering I go through is ever for nothing. That God is taking every pain and every suffering, and he is using it in the life of those who love him. There is a condition there, though. This isn't a promise for everyone, okay? It's not a promise for just your average person who's an unbeliever. This is a promise for those who love God. This is a promise for those who love God. And I believe that everyone in here loves God. And so it's your promise to hold on to, is that God will not waste anything that happens in your life, any pain, any suffering, that God will use it. So memorize it. Romans 8:28. Memorize it, please. So, but maybe this morning I will say that maybe you're not really convinced that discontentment is all that bad of a thing. You know, after all, we are good Americans, most of us, and so we're always supposed to be striving, right? Always supposed to be growing. Always supposed to be continuing on, getting better, bettering ourselves. Isn't that what Paul says? Like, grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Don't be content with where you are, but continue to grow in that way. Yes, so yeah, there is a sense in which there is a certain type of striving that we should all be having as Christians, striving to know God more, striving to love God more, striving to live more godly lives, to never be content with this sort of imputed righteousness that we have, just to go on and do good works. Yes, so we should be growing, but there's a certain way in which discontentment will rob us from any chance of being content. I think that here's a fact in which no one in here will disagree with. No one here is going to disagree with this fact that though life in the 21st century is more luxurious, more comfortable, people are growing less and less content and satisfied with things. So, 100 years ago, They didn't have self-flushing toilets. I mean, you don't even need to reach your hand back there and push the handle anymore. Such a convenience, right? We have instantly warm food. We don't even need to wait for the pot to boil anymore. We can stick it in the microwave and wait 30 seconds, which sometimes it seems like too long for us, isn't it? We need more instant. You know, we just want to blink our eyes and have it warm. We also have other comforts like entertainment galore, right? On-demand entertainment. You can watch anything you want on television at any time you want. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. You can also DVR any show that you missed. Some of you are back, like you're 6 months back on shows, but you're saving them. You're going to watch them later. You'll catch up, binge watch. We have so many luxuries. You have a car, and you can go anywhere you want in this country. You can jump aboard a metal bird and fly to destinations that couldn't even been imagined 100 years ago. There is so much luxury, yet we have seen not an increase of contentment, but a decrease in contentment. So in terms of contentment, more doesn't always mean more. More actually means less. The more you get, the more you want. That's the way it works in the world of contentment. And we also have things in which, you know, I just think it's just so sad that, because I have bad teeth, and I've been to the dentist many times and had my teeth drilled and had root canals, and I can't imagine going to the dentist where all the anesthetic I had or all the Novocaine I was given was some whiskey. I just don't fathom a world where they didn't have general anesthesia. But they did, and yet they, in that time, were probably more content than we are in our time. Comfort doesn't equal contentment. More does not equal more. With more comes the desire for more. And I think that we're coming upon a truth, right? Our hearts are like a burning fire. Calvin called them an idol factory, and we won't stop until we have them all. We have it all. We won't stop. Nelson Rockefeller was once asked, how much money does it take to make one happy? And he so wisely responded, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. What kind of house will you be happy with? Just a little bigger one. What kind of car would you be happy with? Just a little nicer one. Isn't that so true of us? Which one of us would say that that's not true of us? And it's because of discontentment that we actually wreck our lives. We make a mess of our lives. We change jobs. We change houses. We change careers. We change spouses. We, with startling frequency, change CRC pastors. Okay, I'm not talking about this church, but I'm just saying broadly, the average tenure of a CRC pastor is short. Article 17s are on the rise, everyone. Exciting, right? This is the reality that we are people who are discontent, right? We always are looking for something better, something that will satisfy. What is it? And I'm not preaching to you, I'm preaching to myself. I will tell you all honestly, and I said it to Kristen yesterday, there is not a sermon which I have preached here, not one where I said, I got this. I can preach this one from personal experience. Let me teach them how to do it. All of this is preaching to myself. I tell you, every morning when I drive myself to work, I wrestle with discontentment. I drive right by that Ford dealership, and I see that beautiful Ford F-150 Raptor, and I'm like, I gotta have that. How do I get the financing for that? I'm driving this beat-up boxcar with peeling paint. The windows don't properly roll up and down. The lock, I have to do it by hand. What an inconvenience. And if I could just upgrade, let me upgrade, I will be happy. And then I know what the end result of that upgrade is, right? It's a payment. And I will not be content until that car is paid off because I want more money in my pocket. And then once that car is finally paid off because it costs a boatload of money, I'll want a new car because that one will be old and everything will be going wrong with it. And my kids will have crushed McDonald's hamburgers in the floor. You know how it works. We won't stop till we have it all. And even that will not satisfy what we really want. It's a discontentment that we all live with. So, how do we learn to be content, as Paul said? I have learned to be content in all things. How do we learn that? First thing I would like to encourage you to do is to limit the voices of discontentment in your life. Limit the voices. Start by giving thanks for what you have, okay? Start by giving thanks for what you have. You want more? How about we give thanks for what we have? I'm thankful that I have a car that drives from A to B to C. I have air conditioning. Sure, my CD won't come out when I push eject, but that's okay. I can be thankful that I have a CD in my CD player and that I can listen to it over and over again if I want. There is so much that we have to be thankful for. We have someone who shares the load as a spouse, parenting. Maybe they're not the best at it. Maybe they're not even good at it. But there is so much for us to be thankful for. So limit the voices of discontentment in your life. And this is one thing I want to say, is that some of you are like, I hate my job, I hate this part of my life or that part of my life, I'd like to see something new happen. You can pray. And there's a way you can pray where you can give thanks for what God has given to you. You can ask him for something new, okay? You can say, God, thank you for providing for my needs with this specific thing. I would love it if you would open up a new door for me, a new avenue for me. That's okay. We can do that. But we should also still remember to give thanks for what God has given to us now. And even if it stinks, even if it's rough, even if people are mean to us while we're doing it, we can say that God is at work in this situation. God is causing all things to work together for good. Even if I can't see it, I have to trust in his sovereignty. And that's why discontentment is a lack of trust in God's sovereignty. Let me ask you, how do advertisers affect our contentment? They show us things and we say we gotta have it. Whoa, look at how sharp that knife is. It cuts a tomato better than the knife I have. Whoa, look at that blender. It actually likes less noise as it crushes my ice. Whoa, look at that thing, that mixer that can really mix things. I mean, you get it, right? You gotta have it. It's like the old marriage adage, for guys, like the China hutch, right? You don't gotta get it, you just gotta get it. You get it? You don't have to understand why it will make your wife or husband happy. You just have to get it. Okay, that was not fair. But I'm a male, and so it's hard not to be biased. So limit the voices in terms of advertising. I would say that, hey, I shouldn't advertise for like DVR and stuff like that, but record the shows. If you want to watch a show, record the show and skip the commercials. Like, they are causing you to be discontent. We cannot underestimate the power of advertising. Another thing, do less window coveting. I mean window shopping. Okay? I know this is hard because it's a hobby of mine, okay? But do less window coveting. Do less just random browsing. What's the Amazon deal of the day? Do you know what that is? Some of you are like, I don't even know what that is. But others of you are like, I know, every day I'm checking the Amazon deal of the day. That is feeding into a spirit of discontentment. If you're a collector of things like autographs and stuff like that, you realize that you're never going to have enough, right? There's always a new player. There's always a new up-and-comer. Or there's always the old guys that have set all the records. And you want them all, right? And you'll never be content until you get that one. The second thing I want to encourage you to do, so the first thing was limit the voices, okay? Limit the voices that cause discontentment. The second thing is to look back at the faithfulness of God in times of difficulty. to remember back. If you can, if you know how to write, keep a journal. Sometimes it's so important because you go back and you look over that journal every once in a while and just say, oh yeah, I remember that bad breakup. And I can see now that that person was really bad for me. But at the time, it really, really seemed like God hated me. And I really wanted that relationship to work out. It's good to remember the ways that God has been faithful to you. And it'll help you to be content in what he has for you now. And finally, I want to say this. What will change the desire that will cause you to not want that anymore? So, okay, I just said that in a weird way. Think about what it is that you truly are after. In other words, I always tell this to people in premarital counseling. Can that person give you what you really want? Do you know what you really want? So many people look to their spouses for so much more than their spouse can give them, right? That's why when you're in this infatuated stage, it's so dangerous because you feel so fulfilled when you're with that person. You feel so in love. You feel all of these things. You feel full. But then what happens is that goes away. That peels away. It's not a reality. And then you become discontent. So look at the things in which you desire, you believe that will give you something, and realize that it cannot deliver on its promises. If you think that a new spouse would make your life so much better, think about it. Can that new spouse deliver on that promise? Can that new spouse make you content? If it's a new job, can that new job really deliver on the feeling that you are desiring, that significance? It can't. And so you have to know that the only thing that will scratch that itch that you have is God. The thing that you are desiring, which you may not have put your finger on, is you desire God. And the only thing that will satisfy is trusting in God. And then you will be satisfied. The answer is not in the thing. It's in you. The problem lies within you. It's not in your circumstances. So here is, I think, the bottom line truth is unless you are satisfied in God, nothing else will satisfy. Nothing. Until you rest in God, nothing else will satisfy. I remember when my sister was trying to get pregnant, and she thought for the longest time, if we could only just have those kids, then we'll be happy. Then we'll have it, right? We'll have that nuclear family. And then they had the kids, and there was marriage stress immediately after. Can you imagine that? Anyone who's had kids understands that with kids comes trouble and joy, but trouble. And so things had gotten more difficult. Just remember that the things that you desire are not what you really desire. You desire God. Finally, I want, in conclusion, to turn back to the text, if you have it open there. Look at what Paul suggests for the Colossians and what has worked for him. He says in verse 11, I'm not saying this because I am in need. In other words, he was afraid the Philippians thought that he was asking for an offering because Paul is in jail, okay? Paul is in prison. Now he's saying, I'm not asking or saying this because I have a need, for I have learned to be content in whatever the circumstances. So in other words, I never have a need because God has taken care of me. And he says in verse 12, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And this was his secret, okay? I can do all things through him who gives me strength.